Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and on books. And today I am joined by Matt on Books, representing the mob, Matt on Books. There will be a link to his channel below, but the reason Matt is here... Hello, Matt. How are you?
Hi, AP. Thanks for the invite.
The reason Matt is here is I've been really enjoying Rings of Power, and Matt, on the other hand, left me a comment about some of the issues that he was having with the show. So I thought this is actually a perfect opportunity for us to talk about the show from the perspective of someone who loved it and is very forgiving of certain things in it, and someone who had certain things in it that irked them. And so we can talk about it, and we can talk about why these things work or don't, and what our expectations are, and all of this. I think it's a fascinating conversation. So, Matt,
the first thing I'd like to say is maybe it's a bit of a disclaimer. We were talking about it a little bit before we started recording. The discussion around this show and similar shows recently has been really irritating me. And I do not want anyone to think that I should be lumped in with the haters, because to me, first of all, I'm not anything like a Tolkien scholar. I haven't studied it in the way that you have, and I've read Lord of the Rings 10, 12 something times, but it's been a few years. I DNF'd the Silmarillion when I was a teenager, and I haven't tried again. I want to. But all of my criticisms of it were based on the experience of watching it. They were not based on the expected length of an elf's hair. They were not based on the color of the cast. They weren't based on any of these sort of, on the one hand, racist, and on the other hand, Tolkien purist kind of discussions. Yeah, it had nothing to do with any of that. But when I was watching it, I was thinking, a lot of it, I was thinking, wow, the acting in a lot of cases is pretty wooden. A lot of the decisions that characters seem to be making seemed kind of stupid to me. A lot of the scenes were more melodramatic than at the time they felt like they needed to be. And then there were a lot of little inconsistencies. Well, one of my favorite little inconsistencies, you were talking about your OCD about the direction that the meteor was flying, and the 180 rule and all of that. My favorite inconsistency or continuity thing was in the second episode when Galadriel's dagger on the raft, Galadriel's dagger appears, disappears, appears, disappears, and appears again when it's needed. Little things like that are like, whatever, no big deal.
And well, first of all, let me say, I am not a Tolkien scholar. I know Tolkien scholars, and they have a frightening level of knowledge about Tolkien's legend.
Compared to me, you are a Tolkien scholar. Let's put it that way. But in the relative world of our conversation, you're a Tolkien scholar and I'm not.
Okay, but I want to put it out there that I am in no way claiming to be a Tolkien scholar, because I know the Tolkien scholars and they don't look at me and go, AP, did you just pretend? And the thing is, they know their stuff, and I love them for it. But we all have different specialisms. But I think one of you raised some brilliant points here. So let's talk about continuity. And one of the things about continuity is there are lots of times when we are absolutely forgiving about continuity errors. If you think in action movies where the hero pulls out a gun and they fire off, it's a semi-automatic pistol, and they fire off 20 shots, and then another 20 shots. You go, how many bullets are fitting in this gun? But it's an action sequence, and you want lots of guns going. And then, they'll have a scene where they eject the cartridge or the clip or whatever it is, the thing out the bottom, and then they put in a new magazine, because that's a really cool shot to have. And then they fire again, and then they fire loads of shots, because we forgive that, because we go, yeah, but it's a movie. or it's a TV show. Whereas then you can have things like in Dirty Harry where it becomes really, really important. And it's like, how many bullets did I actually fire? And suddenly it's important. And sometimes in a lot of these actions, it's the click and the gun is empty at a dramatic moment. And we forgive a lot of those continuity things because it's service of the narrative. And really the number of bullets in a gun, when the purpose of what is being shown is action, we don't really care. And that means that we are forgiving of certain continuity things when we don't care about them. But when it is something that is scratching at the back of our eyes, that's when we start noticing it, and we keep noticing it. So with Galadriel's dagger is a perfect example of this. Galadriel's dagger, or well, her brother's dagger that she carries, it appears and disappears. It does. And she's wearing a white shift when she jumps off the boat, and she's holding it in her hand, and you go, and then she's swimming without it in her hand. So what is it now at her back? And then when she climbs on there, it appears and disappears. And that is a continuity thing that, you know, can be really, really bothersome. But here's the question. In Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, when Frodo has the ring on a chain around his neck, how does he keep putting it on his finger? You go, but so you'd have to take it off and then do that, and then the chain would still be hanging. But that's never how it is, because no one cares. No one cares that when he's wearing it on a chain around his neck, that the chain appears and disappears all the time, because that's not important. And why is it not important? Because we're not watching something that is meant to be realistic and mimetic. We're watching something that is a narrativized, mythic story. And when we start applying real world verisimilitudinous mimesis to make it like down and gritty and as if this actually happened, we're applying a narrative paradigm to it, a narrative lens to it, and saying it should be this way. And that's a lot of our expectations about it. But when we think about a lot of the stuff in Tolkien, none of the story is told that way. It's told in terms of the grand epic myth of this world that never was. And that's not to say that they should just throw all continuity out the window. But it's one of the reasons why Galadriel's dagger appearing and disappearing doesn't really bother me, is because, yeah, whatever, it's not really important. The important thing is what the dagger represents and its symbolic resonance in certain scenes. But
I think part of where or part of the reason it did jump out so strongly, that particular thing jumped out so strongly at me, was the whole bit with her in the ocean, and then there's a raft and so on. That doesn't feel mythic. That feels very down to earth, gritty, fighting for survival. We're probably going to die out here in the ocean kind of. And all of the people on the raft are all like, they're all sunburned and look like they're suffering, and they've been out there for a while, and life is rough. So it felt like it's coming down to a grittier level. And like in comparison to an endless magazine of bullets, in those cases, I can't see the bullets. Right? They're not obvious. And unless I'm counting in my head and making a real effort, I mean, sometimes in some action films, it becomes kind of ridiculous. It's been like 50, 60 bullets. Can you really do that? But the thing with her dagger is it's so obvious. It was jumping out at me. It's like she's wearing this wet white shift, and I'm immediately thinking, where'd her dagger go? Oh, there it is. Oh, where'd her dagger go? Oh, there it is again. Okay. Yep. So it was just a little bit obvious in a context where it felt like we're in realism. Yeah, weird things happening in Linden feel like we're in mythology. But then on the raft, it feels very real, and a detail that isn't very real just seems really obvious.
Yeah, and so the reason it doesn't bother me is the first stage on Arda, the first stage of Middle Earth, the first stage of the Legendarium, that is the golden age, the grand age, the huge scale and almost entirely unrelatable to us. The end of the third age, where we get the Lord of the Rings, that is getting much closer to the mundane. So you start at really high epic, and Tolkien's entire story goes from high epic, mythological, very symbolic, all the way down to the mundane world where magic has left, where things are more prosaic and more like our world. And the second age is kind of in the middle. And I think in some respects, the showrunners picked one of the most difficult things to actually put a show in, because it's not the really high. Yes, it's epic, but there's some aspects of realism. It's trying to tread that line between the two. Whereas when we get to the third age, it's barely into the mythic and very much grounded. And a lot of our expectations and a lot of our perceptions of what a story should do, how a narrative should function, are very much based in that we need a rational explanation for everything. When Tolkien's world is irrational. And because remember the scene in Fellowship where, Frodo, the necklace has come off that had the ring on it, and Boromir picks it up. You go, how did the ring come off? Oh, well, the ring wants to go to other people. It has this sort of semi-sentience. And you go, but physically, how did it do that? No, forget about the rational for a minute. It's magic. It did something. But when we have Gandalf saying, when he's offered the ring, I don't even want to touch it. But earlier on, Gandalf picks the ring up. I can't remember if it's in Jackson's version, but in the book, Gandalf actually handles the ring with Frodo.
Yeah.
So why isn't he tempted then? Because later on, it's the do not tempt me, when Frodo offers it to him, and he's like, but 10 minutes ago, mate, you were holding it. What's changed? And the thing is, Tolkien wasn't concerned with that level of fidelity to realism, because he just wasn't. It wasn't the thing that motivated him. And when we have an expectation that it's going to match that, you would actually have to change a lot of the stuff about Tolkien's writing and Tolkien's world and Tolkien's ethos of the world in order to make it the thing that's going to fit this modern expectation. And I can understand why it bothers people, but when we think of a lot of like Greek mythology, and when we're reading those stories, where if you applied logic to it or realism to it, you go, none of this how does that make sense? What's going on here? Because it's a very different style of storytelling. And trying to walk that tightrope between the two can be very difficult, because we have expectations about this mimesis, about this recreation of the real. And yet the number of times, think in Fellowship of the Ring, the Jackson version, where do the hobbits on Weathertop have short swords? Now, if you've watched the extended edition, Aragorn gives them all short swords. Well, where did Aragorn?
There was a chunk that was cut out of the book,
but
where those short swords are really important in the book. I mean, they're extremely relevant, but
where did Aragorn
have short swords?
But where did Aragorn get them? Because he gives them to them on their way to Weathertop, because they needed them for that scene. And so Aragorn takes this bundle and takes out these 4 short swords. Yeah. First of all, Aragorn didn't know that he was meeting 4 hobbits. So why was he carrying around these 4 short swords? And none of it makes sense. And it's because Jackson
he knew he was meeting 2, and he brought 2 extra.
No,
he knew he was meeting 1, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, he knew he was meeting 1. But
he brought a selection. Like, which one do you like best, Frodo? Take the one you like best.
So when we think through the rationale, if we take it from Aragorn's perspective, it's like, right, I have to go and meet this hobbit. I'm going to stop off and buy 4 short swords. And added to that, like, one of the big things is Aragorn carries Narsil. He carries the blade that is broken. It's how he proves who he is. But that's not practical when you're running around and you have to fight people that you have a broken sword. And so in the Jackson version, they go, oh no, the Shards of Narsil is that's all in Rivendell. So the lore got changed in order to try and make it more realistic, and yet in doing that, it kind of breaks everything that Tolkien was trying to do with this. The symbolism of him carrying Narsil, the fact that the hobbits on the Barrow Downs get these ancient blades that are important. And so we can see, you watch that scene and you go, oh yeah, I'd forget about it. But it makes no sense. It's silly. And even with the Nazgul, they wave torches and that keeps the Nazgul back. Right? So they're not really that scary then if they're going to be put off by, I got a stick that's on fire.
Yeah,
and yet,
I mean, Aragorn sets a number of them on fire, and that's a big deal, which, why?
Because a lot of it was symbolic, and we're not meant to think about it in those terms, and we forgive it because we buy into it. It's the willing suspension of disbelief. And if you're not willing to suspend your disbelief, if you are insisting on a rational explanation for things, that is going to cause problems. And it's fine. No one is saying that you have to like it, but saying it's not doing this thing, and you go, but none of Tolkien's stories did that thing.
Yeah, I mean, that it kind of, I guess it's kind of a jump to the twist at the end of our conversation. Like, our conversation came to be because I had made some comments on your video when you were discussing it with Philip. And after we went back and forth a little bit with comments, and after I'd watched both of your videos, I sat down last night and rewatched both episodes of The Rings of Power. And your discussion framed it for me, where I realized when I was watching it, I thought, I know what the problem was when I was watching it the first time. The problem was I was in House of the Dragon mode. And I'd come from, I actually had a night, the first time I watched it, I had invited a friend over who doesn't have the streaming services. And he's also a big fantasy fan. We enjoy watching these things together. So we sat down and we watched both episodes of the House of the Dragon and had dinner, and then watched both episodes of Rings of Power in one night.
Ooh.
And yeah, it was a mistake.
You could maybe do it the other way around.
You could maybe do it the other way around, but yeah, the gritty realism that is most of House of the Dragon, if you're in that mode, and I've been super enjoying House of the Dragon, yeah, it's extremely good and I'm loving it. And then you go straight into this kind of mythical, kind of doesn't always make sense and some hand wavy because magic stuff that is Tolkien. I mean, it's not just the show, it's like those are the books. And you go straight into that, then you're like, why is everyone acting so badly? Why is all the dialogue so wooden? Why doesn't stuff make sense? And I think that was it. And I enjoyed the second watch after you guys framing it and reminding me, okay, this is actually kind of what Tolkien is. I enjoyed the second watch a hell of a lot more. You know, I still think there are, I mean, one of the things, and I guess it's just an expectation of watching series and watching movies, you expect actors to be acting. And the guy who played Arondir, he's got a couple of very subtle facial expressions, but basically he's only got one.
But you see, I would say I actually really like Arondir. So much of what he is doing is internal. That he has this. Now, if we compare, and again, to compare it to Jackson's version, because it's the one where people really have had a lot of their vision of Tolkien crystallized. Orlando Bloom playing Legolas. Again, a lot of it is a very, very stiff, emotionless face, except for looking concerned into the distance. That's what Orlando Bloom does for about 2.5 movies. It's, and it's portentous. But it's because in some respects, and again, I think this is one of the difficulties with the Second Age, because elves are going to be such a big part of it. How do you set the elves apart from humans? And Wheel of Time ran into this as well, because the Aes Sedai are meant to be have these ageless faces. But if everyone was walking around with a very ageless, non-expressive face, we'd go, well, they're all just wooden. And again, part of it is we want to see a level of emotion on a face, because it's how a lot of us respond to and take our signals from. But if that's what the humans are doing, how do you set the elves apart? Because then they just look like humans with pointy ears. Right. So if we make them look much more formal and different and alien, that they don't have a lot of facial expressions. Oh, well, now I can't connect to them. And now I can't, what are you going to do? Because you either make them relatable so that people can buy into their characters, or you make them alien, and how do you then get them to buy in? And it's a difficult tightrope. And I think Arondir especially, I actually really liked it, because a lot of it was done with, again, the set of his head, how he paused. A lot of it was done, and they are very small movements, very small things.
He's got. I noticed on the second watch, especially with his interaction with Bronwyn, there's just little tiny bits where, he's smiling a little bit, or his eyes have maybe a loving look, or, the rest is quite stiff and kind of wooden, but there's just little tiny details that I kind of missed the first time, I think. The other thing I think they did really well in that context is Elrond, who is only half elf, seems like the most emotional elf in the entire show.
No,
he has a lot more expression.
Yeah, no, we have to be very careful here, because I know, right, although Elrond is technically half elf, he is fully elf, because he chose to be elven. He was given the choice.
Right.
But and I know some Tolkien purist is going to get very annoyed at the suggestion that Elrond is not a full elf. He is Elrond half elven.
Let's piss them off. I'm here for it.
But again, it's one of the things that I find fascinating. Like Gil-galad as a character is quite different from Gil-galad, particularly in the later parts of the Legendarium. But Gil-galad, I think, was in his 70s or 80s. Like, he was really young when he became High King. And Galadriel is thousands of years old by this stage. And she is really powerful. She's respected. So one of the things that I think the showrunners did that was interesting is Gil-galad has been thrust into this responsibility as High King through a twist of fate. And I think he has a deeply insecure base, because he hasn't grown into the character of Gil-galad that we see fighting Sauron with the alliance of elves and men. He gets to that stage, but he has to start somewhere. And when you see, like, Galadriel has been going on this mission and she's come back, the exchange between them, Gil-galad, he's gotten Elrond to write the speech, and we saw that brilliant moment where Elrond sitting scribing it, and he's playing around with it, and then Gil-galad gives this very pompous, formal, "Oh, I'm going to deliver this speech."
And Elrond is in the background mouthing the words.
And that's why, like, Galadriel looks up and you see her half smile as she realizes it. And then you have this moment where Gil-galad is offering the wreath to Galadriel, and she's staring at him. And you can almost hear him. Now, this is me projecting meaning onto the scene, because this is how I am reading it. But he's going, "For the love of God, please, please do not force this issue.
Just put your fucking eyes down so I can give you this honor. Please, just do it."
And
yeah, I got that too.
And she submits, which means that Gil-galad, because if you look in the background, there's a bunch of elves standing there, and Galadriel hasn't been home in a long time. And here's one of the most powerful elves who has ever existed, coming back to this jumped up, really young new king who doesn't have hundreds or thousands of years of experience, and she respects his authority. And that moment, for me, because I knew that Gil-galad is basically a new king. Now, is that accurate to the moment in time where we are in the history of Middle-earth? Like, doesn't matter. They're trying to get across about the hierarchies and stuff within the elves. And when people talk about stuff being lore accurate, for a start, the lore is heavily conflicted. If you've just picked up the Silmarillion, you go, oh, but it's very clear that this happened. You go, well, look at the unfinished tales in the histories of Middle-earth, and then look at the letters, and then look at, as soon as you start delving into it, you realize that while people treat the Silmarillion as gospel, the lore of Middle-earth is sometimes conflicted, sometimes contradictory. It doesn't make sense. A lot of it is fragmentary. And even the ancestry of a number of the really important elves, you go, well, surely Tolkien knew who their parents were. You go, and he does, look, here's a family tree, here's the chart. And here's another chart that has a different family tree for the same elf. Oh, right.
I'm also a fantasy nerd. I have all the understanding in the world for a director who is trying to adapt a book, and especially in a book that is held almost higher than the Bible in the nerdery. I'm super understanding. Like there are things you change because they just work better in a movie or a series. There are things you change because you're compressing a whole bunch of stuff that you don't have enough budget or episodes to cover. And there are things you change because you don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, and you're legally not allowed to put certain things in there. I mean, like, to me, an example of that was like the Arondir Bronwyn romance. They can't do Beren Luthien. They can't even mention their names. So, but it's such a big theme. Like, it happens in the Silmarillion twice, where elf and human get together and it leads to tragedy. So I'm expecting Arondir and Bronwyn to lead to tragedy. It's a big theme. It's a big thing that Tolkien included, which I'm looking forward to them including, but they couldn't do it from the lore, you know.
And also, like, the majority of the Silmarillion is about the first age, and so, and I think this is a big problem that Rings of Power has as a series, because because Tolkien's Legendarium is enormously complicated, and when you're dealing with a lot of these elven characters, they have huge backstories and very complicated interpersonal relationships, and it's a very complicated world. How much of that do you include? And for someone who is new to Tolkien, or got to Tolkien via the Peter Jackson movies or the Bakshi animation, how much do you include for them? Because you're going to need to explain some things. Someone who is a fan of the books, and it's The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, even the Silmarillion, do you want to add things for them? Someone who is a huge Tolkien fan, who has read the Unfinished Tales and the Histories of Middle-earth, and has read the various works published posthumously and were edited by Christopher Tolkien, based on a lot of the fragments and notes and half-formed ideas. Because Tolkien, again, he was changing and going back and rewriting things and changing his mind about things consistently and constantly through his entire life. One that crops up is Middle-earth flat? Or is it a globe? Because the first age is very much flat, and then it becomes a globe. And then Tolkien was actually trying to decide whether or not, should I just make it a globe from the beginning? But a lot of that plays into it, that something like that's a fundamental aspect of the world. It was a flat earth, because it's mythic and strange and weird and wonderful. And you go, well, if they made the entire planet round from the beginning, that's breaking the lore. If they make it flat from the entire beginning, technically that's also breaking the lore, because, you know, it's because which aspect of the lore? And this is where I think the showrunners do have an issue, which is trying to decide how much of these highly technical, complicated things to include, how much to simply refer to, how much to explain, and how much to go, you know what, let's not get into that. And that is a really difficult decision to make, depending on which audience you're looking at. Because we take that opening scene with Galadriel in Valinor, the very, very beginning, the prologue. So first of all, we have Galadriel giving this voiceover to the prologue, which is from one respect, a wonderful nod to an acknowledgement of how Peter Jackson opened his films. Galadriel giving the voiceover. And you go, that's really nice. Of course, if I didn't like it, I would go, well, they're just ripping off Jackson. So we're deciding the same thing. And on the one hand, we're saying and for those of you who noticed a strange break there, it's Amazon Shill detected Matt was getting an Amazon delivery. Oh, clearly been bribed to change your mind about the Rings of Power, Matt.
I unfortunately had to pay for my new microphone stand all by myself. Amazon hasn't clued in to me. Actually, I think if anyone's shilling, it's you guys, because you're so positive. I actually had criticisms.
Well, and the thing is, you can recognize that things are not working. But if they don't bother you, what am I meant to do? Make up that they bother me? They didn't bother me. So to get back to this point about that opening, so we have this scene of Galadriel as a child. Now, and this is really, really weird for Tolkien, because how often do we see elven children? And when you think about it, if an elf lives thousands of years, they're only going to be a child for a very tiny amount of time. And really, Tolkien was never focused on that. But clearly, elves at a certain point get born, but at the very, very beginning, they awoke fully formed. And because it's a creation myth, they didn't all turn up as babies who then were just lying around and needed people to look after them.
No one around to look after them. Yeah.
And so we have this creation of Galadriel remembering back to Eden, to the perfect time. And this sets the stage of, nothing is evil in the beginning. This is going to be a big theme about this, that evil creeps in. And we see her, she is set apart from the other elves. And so we have one of our central characters, one of our main characters. And she's making this boat out of cloth or paper, some sort of foldable thing. And she's whispering to it. And this is this wonderful thing about, this is the magic of shaping. The magic of, and you think when Gandalf heals Theoden in Jackson's thing, he talks to him, and it's the power of the voice heals Theoden. When we talk about Saruman and the forked tongue, because he was beguiling people and twisting, again, it's all about the voice.
Saruman, and Gandalf talking to the moth. And
don't get me started on that. That really bugs me. But so she's whispering to it, and so when she sets it down and it unfolds, and we see this beautiful magical thing, and then of course the other kids, being kids, because we're seeing it from the Elvish perspective, they don't think of themselves as strange ethereal beings. To them, they are normal, and so they start throwing rocks at it, because one of them, who is red-haired, is a bit of a shit, and they sink it. And Galadriel reacts with anger and pride.
And violence.
And attacks him. And then it's stopped. And you go, so that sets up, Galadriel is different. Galadriel has magic. Galadriel has a temper. Galadriel has pride. All of that set up. And also, when I was watching it, you feel sympathy for her, because here she's created something beautiful. And these other
I've got to say that was one of the things that annoyed me on the first view, maybe less on the second. But I'm sure I think in the overall structure of the story it makes sense. But that scene and the snow troll scene set up Galadriel is special, super special, and she's magic, and she's the best fighter in the world, and she's awesome, and she's good. And the elven children are dicks, and her evil hunting commandos are completely useless. Yeah, the snow troll scene there's this whole fight where everybody in I mean, they've been hunting evil for hundreds of years. They've been killing orcs for hundreds of years. One snow troll flattens everyone. Galadriel swings her sword twice and the thing's dead.
Well,
and
she actually kills it with the dagger. But
I know in the end she puts the full stop on the sentence with the dagger. But basically she just whoop whoop whoop. And Galadriel's a superhero. Galadriel's the nicest specialist elven child ever. And the other elven children are assholes. And the evil hunting commandos are useless.
Okay, so before we get onto the snow troll scene, let's talk about this scene. So in this, she's bullied. Well, she's not really bullied. They ruin her boat, and she gets annoyed. And this, you would think watching that, you engender some sympathy. You can see that's the intention. We're meant to feel sympathetic for her because she's made this boat and the other kids ruined it. And then she's gotten annoyed and try and punch them. Fair enough. And you can see the intention behind that is, let's feel a wee bit of sympathy for Galadriel. Now, what is interesting is, for those who have knowledge of Tolkien lore, that entire sequence has a completely different meaning. And it's operating on two different levels. You have that, let's feel sympathy for Galadriel because she's a nice wee girl who is doing this thing, and then the other kids are dicks. There's sympathy for your main character. This is such a common technique in all sorts of storytelling. When you start off with your main character, something bad happening, so you feel bad for them and you empathize with them. Fair enough. But for people who know the lore, the symbolism of this is Galadriel's mother's side are the boat builders. So those swan boats, that's actually, the name of the city has popped out of my head, but they were the boat builders. The other elven kids, one of them has red hair, which is representative of Fëanor. And
who created the Silmarils.
But Fëanor,
I think.
But Fëanor, I might actually, I've misremembered the name, but the kinslaying that happens is these Noldor, these go to that city where the boats are and go, we want the boats because we want to go to Middle Earth. And the city that makes the boats goes, you're not allowed to have them. And this leads to the first elf on elf killing, because those elves attack and take the boats, then sail on the boats, then destroy the boats. So what we have symbolically is these elves destroying the swan boats, leading to elf on elf violence in paradise. And this is
so it's kind of foreshadowing to something that doesn't actually appear in the series, but
because it's first age, they're not allowed to show that. But they put it in for the Tolkien lore addicts. So it's all there. And the thing is, Galadriel, in one version of the story, fights on their side, but in another version of that history, fights on the side of her mother's people against them. So the lore is actually conflicted, but she fights against them. So we have that represented. So that's a wonderful example of how they are trying to give people the amazing lore of Tolkien's world, but they're doing it in a way to not alienate a lot of other viewers.
And not break their license agreement.
And not break the contractual agreement. Now, one of the weird things is, you pointed out in the cave, or in the snow troll sale, Galadriel is super special. And you go, unfortunately, that's Tolkien's fault. Because Tolkien sets up Galadriel. She is taller than your usual elf maid. She is tall. She is powerful. She is described as Amazonian. She is hugely physically powerful. But she's also really intelligent and is taught by all of the different Valar. And she is super special in all these different ways. And she, like all of the elder elves, has access to magic. And she is super special. But that's actually how Tolkien wrote her. And either the showrunners go, well, we can't make her super special, so we'll make her crap. And the lore purists will then say, how dare you do that to Tolkien's beloved character? Or
For me, it wasn't even that black and white. It was. I have no problem with her being the specialist elf. That doesn't bother me at all because she's fucking Galadriel. I mean, come on, of course she's special. But everybody she was with looked like a complete useless loser. Like they've never fought anything before. All of them just got bashed around and didn't do anything effective. If one or two of them had gotten in there and gotten a cut or two and then got knocked down or something, I'd be like, yeah, okay, you gave it a good try. But it was like, over here we have a group of elves who are completely ineffectual losers, and then Galadriel takes care of it in 2 swings, and no problem.
yeah, and I can understand.
It was just a bit extreme for me.
And one of the difficulties is Galadriel is actually that much better than them. It is really difficult to try and describe this about how powerful Galadriel actually is. But if you think Orlando Bloom as Legolas in Fellowship of the Ring, there's one.
He was a cartoon.
I know, but there's one cave troll, and the entire Fellowship gets knocked around, and they can barely deal with it. And then Return of the King, I'm sorry, the Mumakil, that he takes out on his own.
Yeah, not so consistent.
So it's an issue with trying to portray how strong elves are. And in that scene, yeah, there is a differential between Galadriel and the others. But the thing is, they aren't commandos. Galadriel is actually, and one of the reasons I kind of object to calling her super special, and some people have called her a Mary Sue, which really annoys me, because she's horrendously flawed. When you see them climbing up when you first see them setting out, there are 4 boats. And then we see this company of elves following her. And then the next shot, when we see more of them, there are far fewer elves. She is a terrible, terrible commander. They are just getting whittled down. When they're climbing the ice sheet, they're all climbing up and they go, right, where's she going? Like, we need to rest. She is driven and doesn't look after her command.
She comes across extremely unsympathetic. I mean, I'm assuming this is a bit of the arc that her character, personality-wise, is going to go on, that she learns to not be such a fanatic asshole. Actually, I mean, she comes off seeming extremely annoying. Like, I'd love to have a beer with Elrond. I would not want to have a beer with Galadriel.
This is one of the issues. On the one hand, people are complaining that she's too perfect. On the other hand, they're complaining that she's unlikable because she's mean. And you go, well, which is it? And for some people, it is. Like you said, she's not particularly sympathetic. And part of it, the way I read it was, in that opening scene, we see we sympathize with her. And then we see the impact of her brother's death. And that causes her to change. And now we're seeing the ramification of someone who has lost everything, who's been involved in these wars, who has seen all of these people die. And she has become cold, and she has become cruel, and she has become unfeeling. Now, think of that scene in the Fellowship where Frodo offers the ring to Galadriel. And she's beautiful and ethereal. And then suddenly we see her rise up and transform with the armor across her chest and the weird lights, and she will become a dark queen. Now, look at the moment that we are starting this story. How can both of those be potential futures for her? And that's the thing. Within her, there is this trajectory. And the showrunners know, or are believing, that people know The Lord of the Rings. They know how Galadriel ends up. So I think they are reliant on the fact that if you know how a character ends up, you're going to be interested in how she got there. And if you know that she has the potential to become a dark, powerful queen, covered in armor and is, really scary, that has to be something that is in her. So they have to show that. So if you're going to do that character arc, how do you do it? And the choice may not work for you, which is absolutely fine. And in fact, the snow troll scene annoys me, because you're right. The other elves do get taken out too easily. But when the Galadriel and her lieutenant basically arrive on the scene, they look and she immediately acts. And the scene has only just started. And I think if they'd cut out the elf being picked up and slammed against the wall, if they'd cut that out, it would have been a much faster scene and shown how powerful Galadriel was. But people always forget that some of those other elves are actually female. They're not all guys, which is one of the things that gets talked about. But yeah, it does set her up as very powerful and driven. And we're not meant to see it as a good thing. We're meant to see, yes, she's powerful, but this is not necessarily good.
After listening to you and Philip talk about it and then watching it again, that scene, and well, more actually the scene of her talking to Elrond before and after the ceremony, I kept thinking of one of my favorite lines out of Tolkien. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. It's just, it's so heartbreaking. But if you think of that, that's the end of her arc. Then putting those together, I'm like, yeah, okay, so this is where she came from to get to the point where she could refuse the ring and accept that she will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel.
And this, again, like I said at the beginning, I think this is the problem of the showrunners are trying to walk this rope between what are we going to explain, what are we going to show, what are we going to imply, how much knowledge do people have of these various things. And it isn't going to be, especially the start of a series, starting a new series where you're introducing brand new characters and concepts is always difficult. And this is one of the big advantages House of the Dragon has. It has 6 seasons of everything that people loved about Game of Thrones to go, this is what people like. It has 2 seasons of they didn't like these things. So not only are people familiar with the world and they know what is going to work and what isn't, and also they're working from a full book that lays all of these things out. But even in that show, there's going to be time jumps. There's going to be things that they have changed. But they're working with a very well-established fan base of a television property. And with that, they know what will work and what won't. With Rings of Power, there are 3 films that people, at the time, a lot of people hated, but now are venerated. And the books. And you don't have the TV show mentality of what we're going to do. And they're setting it in a time period that is actually quite radically different. And you're using characters that we saw the end of their arcs. And they are very different at the end than how they were at the beginning. And one of the scenes that I absolutely loved is, so we get these contradictory images of Galadriel, the young child with a temper, the woman broken by her brother dying, the fear, stress, PTSD suffered by all of these elves who are meant to be immortal, who never thought of death being destroyed. And she becomes so driven. And then when we have her arriving back to Linden, and she is speaking to Elrond. And remember, Elrond is a young elf compared to Galadriel. And she sort of comes up, my friend, and she has that wonderful thing that you do to a kid. She touches his face, and it's so tender, and it's like, I've missed you, you wee scamp. And then she sees that Elrond is trying to handle her because he's the herald to the king. And she just drops that diss of you politician kind of thing. And Elrond
accepts it. He does not contradict her.
Because she called him out. And he's, yep, I am. But then he goes, right, well, that's not working. And he has real talk time. Your command did not betray you. You betrayed the High King. That's how this is going to be spun. Real politics. Know what the situation is. And you can see that Galadriel, that's where Galadriel is suddenly, she is at this crossroads. And that's the journey that is being set up here. And when you look at it in that light, I think it makes a huge amount of sense. And because it makes sense to me in that way, I didn't have a problem with it. But now hearing what other people have said, I go, yeah, well, the cave troll the snow troll scene is, yeah, it's a bit silly. Like almost all of the fight scenes involving elves, like they are. How do you get across how otherworldly she is? And one of the things that I think people forget is just before they meet the troll, there's that ice sheet. And Galadriel punches it, and finds the hidden door. But she's punching the image of her face. She's fighting herself.
Yeah.
She's fighting this twisted reflection. And all the way through, we've had that thing that Finrod had told her about the light in the light of the stars versus the light being reflected on the thing, which is a false light. About how do you know the difference? And sometimes you need to touch the darkness. This is about an element of darkness in Galadriel. And in one of the versions of the Legendarium, in part of the Legendarium, she gets banned from going back to Valinor. And it's only at the end of the Return of the King that, because she passed the test, because she refused the ring, because she showed in that moment that she had changed, that ban was lifted. And that is, that is something that is difficult to communicate without sitting down and explaining this whole complex history. And so I hope that as this goes on, because it's 5 seasons, we're going to have these 5 seasons of these different moments in time that are leading us to the prologue of The Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I totally accept that Galadriel is difficult to get a handle on. She is a complex character, and she's not always nice. What we're going to see is her change over time. Elrond,
yeah.
He's so much fun, and you can see he's quirky, and like even him sitting in the tree writing is very reminiscent of Frodo sitting in the tree reading his book. And yet we see with Elrond, he's not always nice.
Yeah.
And when we think about it, the elves, because they are so detached from our reality, our perception of time, they can appear very cold. Think of how Boromir thinks about the elves. Think about the enmity that is between the dwarves and the elves.
The scenes in Khazad-dûm. I mean, the whole thing. Actually, that was one of the bits where in the first viewing, even I was just like, okay, I'm here for this. This is pretty damn cool. Khazad-dûm looked amazing, but specifically the tension between Prince Durin and Elrond, and then the explanation behind it. That was in both episodes the most emotional bit, and also the most illustrative of like, what are elves? Like it didn't even occur to Elrond that 20 years of not seeing or speaking to your friend would be a problem for anyone. Which is like completely alien to us. It's like, if someone doesn't talk to me for 20 years, I assume we are not friends. I may not be that angry about it. I may be a little sad or whatever, but it's like our friendship is over. Like the absolutely no contact for 20 years. And for Elrond, it's like, oh, wait a sec, that's a problem for you?
And well, part of it is, well, if Durham was so upset, why didn't he send a letter? And you go, applying that real world logic to it again, it suddenly falls apart. You go, well, if you start applying real world logic to a lot of
Although that actually to me says a lot about dwarves, because dwarves are stubborn.
Yeah.
And it fits on both sides. It's like, well, yeah, you could have also called. No, he should have called. Damn him. And I think it's so illustrative of both the traits of both races, that it was just such a touching scene, but also kind of, in a way, I found it kind of sinister as well, because the whole time it's this emotional reconnecting with a friend and forgiveness and all of that. But the whole time I'm thinking, he's still kind of manipulating him though. He's totally pulling his strings. Yeah, and he's totally being a politician, and he's like, oh, I don't want to outstay my welcome, and I'll leave now. And he's just kind of turning his back, looking over his shoulder like, your wife is probably going to put some pressure on you, and you're going to invite me back, right? Any second now. Yeah, there it is. Okay, I'll sit down again. You know,
Yeah.
it's just
And the thing
that,
is,
that whole bit I thought was just remarkably well done. That I just loved from the beginning.
and one of the interesting things about that is when Deeza is talking about resonance, when she's talking about how the dwarves, where the resonance tells them where to mine, where not to mine. And
Foreshadowing that much.
The foreshadowing of that, but also it brings in this whole notion of the relationship that dwarves have with the mountain. And when people talk about bad writing, an example of bad writing or something that fails is when Celebrimbor and Elrond are walking up to the door, and Celebrimbor says to Elrond about the dwarves treat the mountain like an aged parent. Now that
totally
is something
undermines the whole thing about elves having no sense of time.
And the thing is, that makes perfect sense to the viewer. It helps us encapsulate it and go, oh, right, they venerate it like an older parent. But from an elvish perspective, what? What are you talking about? We're immortal.
Makes no sense at all. Which one of you has an elderly parent?
Like, Galadriel is like your great aunt or great aunt. Would you treat her as elderly? No, she'd kick your ass. So, but that's a moment where, again, you can see this. You could say that's bad writing, and you go, yeah. And on one hand, it is. It doesn't fit with what the characters are. On the other hand, it communicates really effectively to the viewer. So, is that good writing? And then you go, well, maybe they should have found a different way to do it. It's if they had reframed it slightly as these dwarves with their short lives, but then suddenly you're getting into they need 3 or 4 sentences to get across this one sentiment to provide the context. You go, okay, so they need to do something else. And yeah, that is something that perhaps the writers should have knocked around in the room a bit more to find something more elegant, because that is a very ham-fisted line. But when we think of the exchange with Deeza, Durin, and Elrond at the dinner table, that is so warm and humanistic and naturalistic. That isn't, there isn't a bad note in that. It feels really real. Like that feels like an actual conversation. And the dwarves have their gruffness and their heightened emotions because they're quick to anger. They're quick to hold a grudge, but they also can love very deeply. That we see that sort of heat to them. Whereas the elves, in comparison, are very cold. And that is, something that we see there. So I think Khazad-dûm, the sequences in Khazad-dûm, I didn't like the boulder breaking sequence. I was bored. But
when the whole thing with the dwarves started, and Prince Durin says, "Okay, we're gonna be breaking rocks," and everybody's cheering and drinking beer and everything, I was like, so the dwarves are basically just the Sons of Anarchy. I'm serious. I was like, this is totally Sons of Anarchy vibes, and I'm here for it. I'm totally enjoying this. It gives you, in just a couple, not even a minute or two, it gives you a feeling for what dwarves are like. That they like this physical competition, that they're all cheering and drinking and shouting and everything, and it gives you an atmosphere immediately.
Yeah, and the thing is, Khazad-dûm, I think, has been one of the high points of the first 2 episodes, because it really gives us insight into this vision of the dwarves, and it is absolutely fantastic. So because of that, I can forgive the bum note of the one line outside, and also the
walking up. The walking up thing, they show this path on the map, and you're like, whoa, that's probably a few days. And Celebrimbor and Elrond are still wearing their robes that they were wearing in the previous scene, and it's like they've gone for a stroll around the corner.
Yeah,
they're not even on horses.
Yeah, and that's if they'd shown them hitching up the horses and being dressed in traveling clothes and doing it, people would have gone,
it just seemed a little lazy. Like they don't have any guards with them. They don't have horses, they must have camped somewhere along the way, and they keep their
But
tents in their pockets, or
I know, but hang on a sec. Why would they need guards?
well, I mean, there's
No,
wolves and
no, hang on a sec.
like dangerous
No,
nature.
right. First of all, no orcs have been seen in centuries. So we don't
No,
have
but
orcs.
not
And you go, okay,
orcs
so
aren't
there
the
might
only
be
thing that are
wolves.
dangerous in the world.
And you go, there might be wolves. Remember that these are two powerful elves. Why do you think they would be scared of wolves?
But they don't even have weapons with them.
They don't
It's like
need weapons.
they've
But
gone on a travel which has been multiple days, maybe a week at that distance.
yeah,
And they don't have any way of camping anywhere. They're traveling as slow as they possibly could. I don't know.
yeah,
It just
and again, I get it, but I looked at it and went, yeah, fine, whatever, because it I noted it and went, yeah, it would have been better if they'd had horses and it had looked like they had actually been traveling, as opposed to, well, we just nipped around the corner. You're like, no, you didn't just nip round the corner. And also, like the town where Celebrimbor is, Eregion, that was formed after the dwarves found Mithril, because it was formed because the dwarves had found Mithril, and Celebrimbor is meant to be friends with Durin, and so we can see how they've changed that slightly. Because if you're conflating time, then go, do we really want to wait 100 years for the elves to build a city? And sort of skip through the build, no, just say that the city's already there. And also, because we're focusing more on Elrond as a good character and Celebrimbor as a character who has a potentially dark fate,
questionable, yeah.
let's focus on that aspect of the friendship, move the friendship that way, and it makes sense. But I know a number of people have actually complained about the Durin hierarchy, Durin's father, and then Durin the son. Now, in the mythology that the dwarves tell themselves,
you guys mentioned this in the other video, like that
um,
Durin is sort of a reincarnation idea, and you don't get named Durin the next.
yeah. And now the thing is, okay, so that is going to annoy some Tolkien purists. But for everyone who doesn't know that, you go, yeah, well, it makes perfect sense for a royal lineage.
That's how kings and princes work. Yeah.
But on the other hand, and this is something I think some of the Tolkien purists haven't thought about. So a dwarven baby gets born and grows up over, let's say, 20 years before they're fully grown, and then starts to exhibit, oh, they seem a lot like Durin. They must be Durin reincarnated. We're now going to call them Durin. So they get born with a different name. Now, how are you going to explain to people that this dwarf that gets born and is growing up is someone else, but then gets rechristened Durin? Because that's not in Tolkien. But that's how it must happen. Because there's no way they look at the little tiny baby and go, he's just like Durin.
Looks a lot like Durin, yeah.
Unless
we have to discuss the most important thing in both episodes, though.
Which is
Theo's hairstyle. I'm on Team Chase on this one, because they made it so obvious. It just seems to me like the way the framing, the cinematography, the way all of it worked. Every time you see Theo, his hair is completely covering his ears. Someone made a decision. We need a haircut that completely covers his ears. He could have had short hair. He could have had long hair that was moving around, whatever. But every time you see him, and then I was looking at him and I was like, he's also color-wise, skin color-wise, he seems like he's kind of between Bronwyn and Arondir. He's a bit browner than his mother. And I was thinking he's kind of got to be. And man and elf pairings always lead to tragedy. And who found the sword?
And the thing, that very may well be
But
what's
you don't
going to
think
happen.
so?
Well, it's not even that I don't think so. It's I really don't care. What's important for me is I'm looking at it, and anytime I see a human character, I don't know if you do this, but knowing where the story is going, I'm going, every time I see a human character, dead or Nazgul. Because important human characters are either going to die off before the end of the show, or become one of the ring wraiths. It's, and because this is the history, and you know that a lot of these characters are not going to survive, I can't help looking at them going, I know how you die. Their death scene is going to be really interesting. It's a very weird position with prequels, but and so with Theo, and it's a bit like the speculating about who the Meteor Man is, and it's
that was my next question. Who is the stranger? But yeah, we'll get to that.
But again, with that, you know, I if I was going to be pressed on it, I would probably think one of the blue Istari, like one of the blue wizards, because it's going to focus on what is happening in Mordor and the lands to the south. That's where the blue wizards went. That it is an Istari. It is going to be someone like Gandalf, like Saruman. So it makes sense that there'd be nice comparisons. It fulfills that need, and it fits with where the story is going to be focused. I think, yeah, the blue Istari makes sense, but I don't care. I want it slowly revealed, and it's something they've added in. And, you know, I know a lot of people enjoy speculating, but I'm just sort of going, yeah, we'll find out when we find out. I'm willing to wait for it. And then as soon as I find out, I will look back along it to see what foreshadowing they put in. And it's the same with Theo. I don't think Theo is his full name. I think he has a much longer name. And his mother is calling him Theo. I think there may be something with his parentage, that he is special.
Is the longer name you're assuming something from lore that I don't know?
No, it's more to do with the fact that her name's Bronwyn, and Theo is etymologically very different.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm assuming, and I could be wrong. It could be that they just don't care about the names of men because, you know, they're men, and there were a lot of different cultures mixed in. Because, you know, when I'm really looking forward to the Numenorians to see whether or not they've gone with that sort of Byzantine or ancient Egyptian vibe, which
I've seen the photos. Like there were some in costume photos of the cast, and it looks like I mean, at least in that direction, they definitely look, you know, a little more complicated, decorative, detailed jewelry and armor and that kind of thing. It does have maybe a Byzantine kind of vibe.
Yeah, but one of the big complaints that I have seen is people don't know what the story is yet, that they don't know why we are following this. And again, I'm sort of going, it's about Sauron making the rings. It's the rings of power.
In the first two episodes, there's almost no evidence of that. I mean, I can understand the complaint if you're not into the whole story apart from the series. If you're just watching the series, all we have so far is a whole bunch of setup.
Yeah, I know, but it's called the Rings of Power. It's like,
sure.
It says this is where the story is going. And if they started with, here's Sauron making the rings, you go, well, you kind of skip the entire buildup as to why this is important.
Yeah.
Then you're just doing the fallout of the ring. You're doing the wars of the rings. You're like, no, that's the whole point. Is this is the Second Age leading up to this is about the sort of the height of these mortal and mundane cities and the fall of Middle Earth. This is the beginning of the fall of Middle Earth, because
yeah, but I mean,
Sauron is very much. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sauron is very much Diet Morgoth, Diet Melkor, because Morgoth had a giant spider, Ungoliant, and then, you know, destroyed the trees at Valinor. Then you have Sauron, who is smaller than Morgoth and has a smaller spider. And anything that Melkor can do, Sauron can do in a slightly weaker, slightly brand knockoff way. And it's this declination of what is going on in the world. The orcs were so frightening very early on because, of course, one of the origins of the orcs is that they are twisted elves. They have the power of the elves of the First Age. And then through the breeding programs, which, if you think about breeding, male and female orcs have to exist. I know some people complain, oh, there's going to be female orcs. You're like, yeah, how do you think they breed? but everything is getting smaller. It's diminutive, that it is this reduction in scale and setting up the state. Again, I thought it was really obvious that this is where the story was going, but then I'm assuming people's knowledge of the Lord of the Rings and when they read the book and going, oh,
that goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording. I mean, you're not a Tolkien scholar, as you explained at the beginning, but you've got a fair bit of knowledge about it, including stuff that is before Lord of the Rings, in Lord of the Rings, in other books, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, a lot of people maybe have seen the movies and that's it.
And in
maybe
the movies,
haven't even seen the movies.
I know, but
and then they're coming to a series with only that knowledge, and I'm somewhere in between. You know, I've read the books. I tried reading some other things. I have a bit of knowledge, but I'm somewhere in between. And of course, your perspective is completely different than a lot of people. And if you don't know any of the lore, the first two episodes are set up. It's not really clear what's going on. Evil is rising. Where are we going with this? I can totally understand that perspective.
And this is, again, it's a weird thing about modern expectations about story. So in House of the Dragon, what's the story? Oh, it's going to be a contest over the Iron Throne. Didn't we already have a TV show that did this? But you go, so that's put in. Well, actually, no, it's about the line of the Targaryens. Well, no, actually, it's going to be about, you don't need to know where the ultimate story is going, because part of the joy of a story is following along with it. But in the modern day, we've become so obsessed with, well, I need to know ahead of time what this thing actually is. Who am I meant to care about? You care about the people in front of you on the screen. Like, why is this difficult? But at the beginning of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, when Galadriel does that voiceover, and we see Isildur and Elrond on Mount Doom. Oh, throw it, Isildur, get rid of the ring. You know, we know that's where this is headed. And that is such a famous, iconic scene. The expectation that people would be aware of that, I think, is a very valid and fair expectation. And when someone says, the Rings of Power, we're telling the story about how we get here, that you go, that's where it's ending up. We know where it is going. We know Elrond is going to be important. We know that Isildur, who we have not met yet, we need to meet Isildur. We know that Sauron made these rings. How many times have we heard the three rings for the elf lords, the 9 for mortal men, 7 for the dwarf? You know, we have heard that so many times, and you go, oh, look, here's this guy saying he wants to make things, and the dwarves are there, and this is called the Rings of Power. I wonder, is this a show about how they make the rings and then what happens? That, for me, because that is so obvious, I don't need them in episode 1 to have Galadriel going, I've come back. Sauron seems to have developed a fondness for metalworking. Oh, look, they showed a forge and an anvil in that scene, and go, Sauron is experimenting with magic. You go, did no one else pick up on that? Like, it is literally in that scene that everyone complains about, because they all focus on the ice troll and not on what they discovered that Sauron was doing.
Sure.
And Elrond setting up, like, okay, Celebrimbor is going to be the smith that does a lot of this stuff. How many of casual viewers know who Celebrimbor is? You go, they don't. So what are the choices? You go, aha, look at my forge, I'm making things, I'm Celebrimbor. And you go, right, we're going to have half an hour of a TV show telling us that he's a smith.
All of that, I think, even for people that have no idea about the lore, like I knew the name Celebrimbor before the series, but even for people who don't, I thought they set that up really well, like with the hammer. And I think a lot of casual viewers could have a big question, like, what are Silmarils? Because they kind of made a big deal of that, but didn't really explain it that much. They're beautiful and they almost turned Morgoth's heart and so on. But
And that's one of my favorite things is obviously when they're making this TV show, they're making it for everyone to enjoy. But for people who have an in-depth knowledge of what happens in the Legendarium, in the history, the mention of the Silmarils is actually really wonderful because look, the Silmarillion, what's that named after? And to have that name drop, this is an Easter egg. And then this wonderful, these, what was it? I can't remember how Celebrimbor fit is. They say that.
They say, yeah.
And it's this wonderful, here's this story that got started. You go, and again, think about it logically. Who witnessed this? Well, no one could have witnessed. It's completely made up. It's a myth. It's a legend. It's a story. And yet it has all of that believability. It has that feeling of truth, which is what we do with legends, what we do with myths. Like, think of the number of stories where like the hero does something and you go, how did anyone find out about this? Like, who told them? You go, no, of course no one told them. It's a story. Like, we're in this myth. And I really love that drop about the Silmarils and explaining how beautiful they were. Because remember that that they were the jewels that contained the light of the trees.
Yeah.
Do you know what else theoretically contains the light of the trees? Galadriel's hair. And Celebrimbor asked for Galadriel's hair to make something, and she refused. Now, who else asks for Galadriel's hair and is gifted it? Gimli at the end of the third.
Yeah.
So, like, even on that level, these are showrunners who are deeply invested in Tolkien's world and are trying to get across so much of it, but trying to not leave people behind. Because as you said, if you haven't read the Silmarillion, you don't really know about the Silmarils. And so someone who knows nothing about it, they go, I don't, but all the rest of us are going, I know how important this is. And so it's a tightrope and a balancing act. And maybe I think that they haven't gotten it right this first two episodes. It may actually even out by the end of the season. But like all TV shows, they're trying to find the perfect point to balance. And when you're dealing with such extremes in terms of audience expectation and audience knowledge, like, these are radical extremes. Because me as a Tolkien reader, I'm really okay with a really slow story and focusing on the characters and finding out about these characters and what they're doing without, oh, look, the Dark Lord has arisen and now we're going to go and fight him. I don't need that told to me. What I want, and it's what I'm getting, is this slow exploration. But for a lot of people, no, they go, but I need to know where it is going. I go, but, like I said, I think it's really obvious where it is going.
I mean, one of the things I thought, I almost felt like the first couple of episodes could have been slower. Sometimes it felt like they have a huge list of stuff that they want to set up as quick as possible, and we're being thrown around. I mean, especially in the first episode, I was like, whoa, wait a sec, where are we now? Who are these people? What's going on? It felt all a bit rushed, and I totally understand that. I mean, first episode of House of the Dragon had a bit of that feeling as well. It's just like, we're setting up so many different things as quickly as we possibly can so we can get on with doing things with those characters, not just who are they? They exist, they're here, they're there. But yeah, it felt a bit rushed. I'm hoping that it calms down a little bit.
And this is the weird thing, like, we both talk about this as a very slow story that's developing, and yet at the same time it feels rushed. You go, how can it be both? And it's the amount of stuff that they are skipping through. It's almost like, we need to establish all these things to get to the good stuff. You need to bear with us. Now, there are different ways of doing this. They could have jettisoned a whole load of the start and just had Galadriel coming back and saying, I have returned from the wars. And people go, well, why is Galadriel in armor? Like, what's going on? And you go, so in order to establish like Galadriel as being this kind of kick-ass, which she is from the lore, you needed to show it. You go, right, so I'll put that in. You go, right, and now we need, well, why is this whole thing about Galadriel being on these quests and not going back to Valinor? Well, we'll put that in. Well, how much of that can we show? Why is Valinor important? Oh, what's the curtain? And so you can see that they kind of started in one place and then have gone, well, we need to add this in. We need to introduce Elrond. Well, we're going to need to introduce Gil-galad. Well, we're going to need to introduce, and you can see it's sort of, this is where we want to be. And we've backfilled all of this. So structurally, one of the ways that you could have done it is start much later and then started dropping in flashbacks.
Flashbacks, yeah.
And what's one of the big things that people complain about? I hate flashbacks in things. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Sure. I think a lot of the dialogue has been very, very Tolkien-esque. And the problem with that is, look at Tolkien. That style is no longer in vogue. It is not the popular style. But do you remain true to how Tolkien would have done it? Or do you go, no, we'll modernize it? Because again, you're going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't. The elves are very stiff and formal and rude and cold. You go, yeah, a lot of them are. Look at what happened in the Elvish histories. But Galadriel was so nice until she turned into the really scary thing. And why is Lothlorien safe? Because even Sauron fears to confront her. Oh, well, if she's that powerful, oh, she is actually that powerful. How are we gonna, right? Do you see suddenly, because of how Tolkien constructed all of this, that is actually contrary to 90% of what modern expectations about fantasy storytelling are. And it is so difficult to reset our expectations and even preferences and desires now, because the genre has moved on. The genre has changed. Our expectations and tastes have changed. So to go back to something like this, in order to try and stay true, they have to have one half in the Tolkien camp. But in order to make it accessible, they have to put the other half in modernizing it. And therefore, you are not going to be able to please either side. And we get back to this point, which I think is the major aspect of the issue at the heart of all of this, is that they can't decide, or they haven't decided yet, exactly where the line is on, are we going mythic or are we going realistic? And those two different story modes operate by different rules. And personally, I'm hoping they lean much more into the mythic, because things like Galadriel's dagger, or the fact when she's on the raft and she's just pulling on this rope, because
I did that fucking rope. But I was like, what are you doing?
But they go, we've designed this raft. There's not really a lot for you to do. Hold on to this rope. And you go, just have her move in motion with the...
Pull on the rope and let it go a little bit and then pull on it again. And like, why? What are you doing?
And again, I think, that was a mistake. That's an error. That's something that maybe they should have changed. But at the end of the day, I go, yeah, is that going to break the TV show for me? No.
No, of course, it doesn't ruin the whole thing. There were a lot of little things like the dagger, like that rope, other bits where it just briefly pulls me out of the story that I was really into. It engages my movie paying attention mind instead of I'm in the story mind, where I suddenly go, what are you doing? What's going on?
But it's like when Bronwyn brings the orc head to the bar. Look what I have found. And then we leave at first light. You go, what? No, you leave now.
Why are you not leaving immediately?
And then she goes back to her house and her son's going, I'm just going to... You go, there's a hole in your floor.
There's an orc tunnel under your floor.
What are you doing?
Get out.
Again, this is one of those ones where you go, like, why didn't you just fix that? And
also the scene where she comes in and Theo is in the wall, in the little box in the wall,
the oven,
and she's like, I'll go get help and leave my child here with the orc. And you're like, And I mean, then she realizes what she's doing and she turns around and stays. What she should have done is get him and get the hell out.
But it's when she sees him and he looks out and he's well hidden and he's like, so does she attract attention and show whatever the scary thing is where he is? Or does she go and get help? And you go, because remember, in the Wheel of Time episode, the first one, where Matt realizes his sisters aren't there and he runs out into danger to go and find his sisters, a whole lot of the fans complained about going, well, that's just dumb. They were hiding and they would have been fine. Why did he run out into danger? And that's just stupid. You go, so here you have someone seeing that their child is hidden and going, well, I'll back out because they're hidden. They'll be safe. And it's, well, she should have gone in. You go, make up your mind, people. And in a split-second decision like that, is she going to be infallible? No, because people can make mistakes. They make dumb decisions. Galadriel jumping off the boat. People go, oh, well, why would she do that in the middle of the ocean? And you go, she's about to basically become dead to go to the afterlife. Now, it is much more complicated than that in the Legendarium. It is. I'm not getting into that.
Sure, but it's basically an irrevocable event.
Either go and
like,
you have
if that happens, she's not going back.
And that's how it's portrayed there. So she makes a decision. She goes, right, I cannot give up my brother's dagger. I cannot give up what this dagger represents. I cannot give up my mission to destroy Sauron because I know he's still there. And so she jumps. Does she go, you know what? I don't have a plan. No, it's a bit like if your room is on fire and you go, the room is on fire. I'm going to jump out the window and say, well, you do realize you're on the first floor. To say, I could burn to death or jump and hope it all works out. And then they go, oh, and it's so convenient and contrived that there's a boat shows up. And you go, yeah, have you read The Lord of the Rings? Oh, look, Bilbo found this ring in a cavern that's pitch black and it was sitting on the ground and it turned... Contrivances happen in mythic stories.
Yeah.
But, and again, if you're in the frame of mind where that is not the story that you want, if you don't have that willing suspension of disbelief, these things are going to add up and they are going to kill you because they're going to bother you. At the same time, when those things start adding up, it ruins your enjoyment of those things that you do like. So I can completely understand that perspective. And this is why I say that, yeah, there are continuity issues. There are issues with it being mythic that is glossing over this real world aesthetic that we kind of want now. And that is playing into the narrative contrivance of mythic storytelling. You're like, yeah, it's a different way of telling stories. And people say, oh, but it's bad. Well, it's not necessarily bad. It's just going that those things aren't relevant. And when you think those things aren't relevant and you just sort of skate past them, it becomes a much different experience because you're focused on different things. And that's not saying I excuse them. They are issues. I just don't care. And when it comes to, you know, a couple of the lines of dialogue, people say, oh, it's like when he says, when Arondir says to the other elf, you smell like rotten leaves. Oh, well, that's a really dumb line. And you go, well, what insult did you want him to use for another wood elf? And you go, well, okay, maybe it didn't land for you. It isn't the world's greatest line. But there's about 3 or 4 lines, I think, per episode that I haven't liked. And yet, the vast majority of it, there are some beautiful lines that I have loved. Like even one of my friends who is also like a big fan of Tolkien said that one of the things that he hated was seeing the statues carved into the trees because the elves venerated.
That also
nature.
Hit me.
The elves venerated.
That also
nature.
hit me. I thought, would elves do that?
They lived in concert with nature, and then when you hear Galadriel talk about it, these are living statues. That these are statues that grow with the tree. You go, right. You notice that a lot of their buildings are made of wood and stone. Like they do carve things. They do make things. Now, in Lothlorien, they have the flats at the end of the Third Age. But way back, you go, how did you think they made their buildings? They used stone, they used wood. They have wooden tables, but the elves would never do that. They would never cut into living wood, or they would never make things out of wood. You go, how do you think they made the wooden table and the chaise lounge that's sitting there? How do you think they made, parts of saddles and things that are made of wood? They didn't just go, oh, look, there's a bit of a deadfall. It's, again, applying absolutist positions. And you suddenly realize the reason a lot of these things feel contradictory is because Tolkien's world is contradictory. The legendarium is not as smooth and as cohesive as a surface level read of it would make you think. Because it's not. A lot of it is contrary. A lot of it wasn't worked out. A lot of the ins and outs and the practicalities of it were not worked out. As much as there's huge material there, the fine detail that you need is sometimes missing. And looking at the statues carved into the living trees, so the tree is still alive, that this beauty has been made from the living thing, and they will grow together. Or they could have, cut down a tree and made statues. You go, that doesn't seem elven.
Yeah.
But working with nature does seem more elven. And again,
it's one of those things that it just visually, I'm a very visual person more than anything else. And when I saw that the first time I watched it, when I saw those people or elves carved into the trees, my feeling, not necessarily accurate information, but my feeling about Tolkien and about Tolkien elves and that visual, I just immediately sort of winced. I was like, elves carving into living trees, But on my second watch, they actually talk about honoring the people by carving them into living trees. And then I was like, oh, okay, that actually kind of makes sense,
And part of it is, quite often there are these things that we interpret. We go, oh, it's very clear this. So the elves would never do that. It's very clear that they would never do that. And then if you start applying logic to it, I go, but a load of the stuff that they have sitting around their house is made of wood. Where do you think they got that from? You realize it's a superficial absolute that's been applied. And as soon as you start thinking about it in practical terms, it completely falls apart. And the fact that the showrunners tried to find a way to balance between something that makes no sense in the legendarium and yet something that clearly is in all of these things, how do you make sense between those two positions? You try to straddle and have a middle ground. And that is enormously respectful of Tolkien's work, but at the same time, I think is leading to this balance issue about, have they erred too much to following Tolkien or too little or too much to trying to make it, to explain it? And that balance, that is going to be a balancing issue, I think, through all of the different seasons, because they either do the things that Tolkien did and make Galadriel super special and everyone go, super special she-elf, or they try to show that she's not perfect, that she does have flaws, that she has these problems, that she isn't always likable and has to grow and has to learn, and she has to move away from the cold, angry pride, which gets her banned from Valinor, and move toward the wisdom and the caring, but still powerful Galadriel we see at the end of the Third Age. That transition is an arc. It's a journey. It's a development. And you go, that's exactly what we want. And they go, yeah, but I wanted to like her from the start. Okay, then that's going to disappoint you because she's not necessarily likable. But we see deep down that she is a good person, because look at how Elrond looks at her. Look at the relationship she has with Elrond. That clearly there is joy and light in her. But so much, she's touching too much of the darkness. She needs to find her way back to the light. That is her journey.
Yeah. I think a lot of that particular part of it is basically habit. Like, we're in the habit of watching things where you get a pretty clear character to like, and it's usually the primary character, and they're usually kind of likable. You know, you get your sides to take presented clearly at the beginning, and so far, honestly, like, I like things about the scenes and the character, but I don't find Arondir particularly likable. Galadriel, not so likable. Basically, the really likables are the Halfwoods.
And
Yeah,
Elrond
Nori,
and Durin. Elrond, Durin.
yeah, no, but I mean the characters who are going to be clearly like primary story driving characters, or at least seem like they're going to be in the first two episodes.
Yeah, Elrond and Durin. Like, they're really important.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess I'm thinking more because Elrond and Durin's. It seems like, at least to me, in the first two episodes, it seems like their roles are going to be a little more background. They're going to be making stuff, important stuff, but the people who are going to be going out and doing something are very much Arondir, clearly, Galadriel, clearly.
It's called the Rings of Power. Elrond's going to be involved in making the Rings of Power.
I know, but you know what I mean, like, right.
So you've
a story full of action. The guys who are making stuff.
You've said the magic word, action. If you're expecting an action version of the Second Age, which, remember, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings is an action version of the Lord of the Rings. If that's what you're expecting, that is very different, because then you're expecting the ones going out and doing things I want to follow that. Whereas that's not what the Second Age is. And if you want an action series, think of, again, House of the Dragon. People were complaining, oh, this bit was slow and it was just them all sitting around talking. Oh, look, the fight scene was brilliant. Because they want it to be an action show. And you go, if you want it to be an action show, it's fine to want that. But when it's not an action show, going, well, it would have been better if it was an action show, for people who wanted an action show. I don't want an action show. I don't. But that actually makes a certain thing kind of clear to me, which I hadn't thought before. So far, to me, the action characters, and there are action characters. Galadriel is clearly an action character. She is going out and doing shit. She is hitting things with swords. Arondir is clearly an action character. The people who are going to be in the story going out and doing things, often with weapons, they're all kind of not so sympathetic. And the ones who are going to be sitting in a workshop building something which will ruin the world, they're much more sympathetic in general. Celebrimbor seems dodgy from the start, but yeah, exactly. But like, Elrond and Durin are maybe the most sympathetic characters, the most likable characters in the first two episodes. And it seems like their role is going to be building a forge and then sitting around that forge making horrible rings. Well, except Elrond is a character that is going to end up, I think, being the connective tissue between a lot of the different things. He connects to Gil-galad. He connects to Celebrimbor. He connects to Durin. He connects to Galadriel. Elrond is at the center of all of that.
Yeah. So
for me, that's why when you said, like, oh yeah, but Elrond's going to be in the background, I'm like, what? He's right smack bang in the middle of everything.
In the background of the action. Let's put it that way. There are going to be people going out in the world doing dramatic things, and he's not going to be one of them.
And I think that is a big disconnect that people are having, because they want the story about, essentially they want Ned Stark with a sword going to kill people and going on a quest. They want that. They want, let's go on a quest and do things, because that's an active storyline. And you go, right, okay. But like, a lot of Game of Thrones was people sitting around talking politics and then throwing
Ned Stark didn't go out in the world and do things.
And
I mean, he wasn't around very long anyway, but he wasn't an action hero.
But if your if your focus is I want to see them go out and do things, you go, well, right, like fine, but that's not necessarily the story. It's because I'm looking at
No,
this.
it's both. It's both because we have got action heroes in the story, and they
No,
are going to be going out and doing some dramatic things.
well, except we have we have people who are going to be exploring the world, but it's not action driven. It's not a quest. And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of direction added to something when you go, here is your mission, go and do. And the people feel, oh, well, this is all aimless. It's kind of just meandering around. And you go, because the story is being uncovered. Whereas if it's a quest, this is why quest novels and things that are actually structured like quest novels tend to be very, very successful. They give you a clear goal that everyone is aiming toward. Let's destroy the ring. Let's get the grail. Let's go and do it. And you go, right, I'm following along on a journey which has an end point. And that's why I said, but the end point is here trying to defeat Sauron. So the rings are going to get made. Sauron is going to raise an army. He's going to kick everyone's ass until the elves and men band together to fight him and cut the ring off his finger. That's where it is going.
Spoilers, AP, spoilers.
It's in the prologue of something that happened 20 years ago. But
I'm joking.
So we know where it's going. The whole thing is, how do we get there? And so when people say, but there isn't a direction yet, and you go, and again, I hadn't realized it's because of this focus on an action direction, which it is, again, it's a different story template. It's a different paradigm. And when you do that, when you're applying that, it's like people who say that you must follow Freytag's pyramid. You go, you don't have to follow Freytag's pyramid.
I don't know what that is.
Introduction, instigating event, rising action, which generally includes the trials of the hero, where the hero succeeds, the hero fails, the hero succeeds, the hero fails, all building toward climax, where the hero confronts the thing started by the instigating action. Then you have your falling action, which is the immediate ramifications and fallout. And then you have your denouement, how the world is at the end, how the world has been lived. And that is
what's changed.
Really, it is a really common story structure, but it is not the only narrative structure. It is common, it is simple, it is straightforward. But people, what we will probably find is one of the story threads will start developing that. One of the other threads will do something different. So we will have multiple story forms within it. But this is the first 2 episodes of season 1. And it is 5 seasons. So we are getting up to the 20% mark in this. So this is introduction leading up to instigating event. Seasons 2, 3 are probably going to be the building and doing things. Season 4 is going to be this coming toward the thing. Season 5, conclusion, denouement, conclusion, falling action, and denouement. That's if you were doing that structure. What we will probably have here, these 2 episodes, then building into season 3, or episode 3, will probably be the introduction of the last sort of set piece of what's going on. Episode 1, elves and the Harfoots kind of added in. Episode 2, dwarves are added in. Episode 3, the main kingdom of the humans is going to be added in. Episode 4, let's start bringing these things together and having the storylines move on. You go, is it too bad to have the first 3 episodes focused on bringing in the introduction of each of the major races? You go, when you think about it that way, you go, that's the first 3. So elves, dwarves, humans. Oh, that's actually a really easy, recognizable pattern. And it's going to be fun. So yeah, I can understand people wanting more of an action, plot-driven, plot-centric story. Right, you might want that. But just because it's not delivering that, or not delivering it yet, doesn't mean that this is bad. And again, I'm happy to admit that, yeah, there are a couple of duff lines. There are some continuity errors. There are things that sort of show that they went, that's unimportant and we're not going to worry about it, which will annoy people. And certainly I noted. But at the end of the day, I just get past it because that's not important to the story that's being told. It's like the inclusion of the Harfoots. How many so-called Tolkien experts have said the Harfoots shouldn't be there when Tolkien said that the hobbits were around at the end of the first age? And you go, oh, and where are you getting that from, AP? You go, concerning hobbits, the opening of the book.
Even just since watching your chat with Philip, I have, and I mean, this is something I didn't know, and I also didn't care when I watched the show. I was like, there's a Lord of the Rings movie which is largely centered around hobbits, and there's a Hobbit movie which is obviously centered around hobbits, and they're making a series that's connected. There's going to be hobbits in it, and I have no problem with that. I like hobbits. I'm wondering when the hobbits learn to wash. That's the only question I had from the series, but I didn't know, because I'm just not that deep into the lore. I didn't know until I watched you talking with Philip that the hobbits are officially around since the First Age. And just since watching you guys talk about it, I've seen numerous different places people saying there's no way in the lore that the hobbits can be in this and they're ruining Tolkien. And I'm like, apparently not.
Well,
and I just don't care that much, to be honest.
But it's a bit like people saying, oh, well, they shouldn't be referred to as hobbits because the word hobbit is from basically one of the human languages that hasn't been invented yet. And you go,
and they're not referred to as hobbits.
And you go, but they're called Harfoots. Oh, well, they shouldn't be called Harfoots because that's going to be from the same language. You go, what do you want them to call them? And you go, well, we could go with the really obscure name of, what was it, the Woozes, which were the primordial sort of pygmies that, if you remember, guide Aragorn in and around the whole Paths of the Dead.
Right.
And they have blowpipes and all of that sort of stuff. And you go, okay, way to alienate all of those people who went, we want to see hobbits. You know,
there's the hobbits.
And using the terms that people are familiar with, you go, that's not disrespecting the lore. It's going, well, all of the elves should be speaking in Elvish the entire time. Well, which of the different Elvish languages should they be speaking? We should just have it all in subtitles. You go, okay, that is a level that maybe an absolute purist would love. And the rest of us would be going, oh my God, you are making this unwatchable. It's a TV show. There has to be
easiest way to make their series fail. Make 50% of it subtitled.
Or make it only for the hardest of hardcore fans. If you make a TV series solely for that, the series will feel it won't be enjoyable because it'll be focused on a whole load of details that we love, but that no one else cares about and actually don't serve a dramatic purpose. And
that's one of the things every time they do one of these adaptations, also Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, I'm constantly thinking about the fact that they know the numbers, right? They're aware of the numbers. They are not making this for us. Like anywhere that they are giving us, like fantasy fans or hardcore Tolkien nerds, anytime they're giving a nod to those people, basically you have to be grateful for it, because the majority of the people that are watching this have not read the books. The vast majority of people are not hardcore Tolkien fans. They probably haven't read the books. And for this to be really successful, they have to get those people watching, because there aren't enough people who have read the books to make it successful just based on the fans.
Yeah, I would reframe that ever so slightly, which is, it's not that we should be grateful for like the crumbs they throw at us, because I think that's a slightly negative way of looking what's happening. They're making a show and they want to ensure that the people that really love this, the people that have those deep dive knowledge of all of the things that happen, they want to go, listen, we know you're watching. We care about this stuff too, but we have to make a TV show. So we're including things that you are going to go, I know what's going on there. So like that opening scene with Galadriel, where it is about the kinslaying, They could have done any sort of scene, but because of the symbolism worked into it, if you knew about the kinslaying, you're going, I know they don't have the rights to that. That was a really cool way to include something they don't have the rights to. Oh my God, that's awesome. And yet other people are going, well, why didn't they just show the kinslaying that they don't have the rights to? Well, why didn't they have someone explain it? You go, because it's really boring having Galadriel go, so this thing that I can't show you, let me tell you all about how Galadriel and Elrond sitting around for half an hour discussing the history of the elves. How many people do you think you would have lost in that?
To put what I said more positively, yeah, I did say it in a kind of a stupid way.
No.
I think we can celebrate the bits that we get, because they are pretty awesome when something like that is in there. And it's maybe a little bit like Warner Brothers cartoons, where like kids can watch them and there's a lot that they don't get, but it doesn't bother them. And adults can watch them and there are jokes in there that are for the adults. And I mean, but for anything like this to be successful, it has to pick up people who are not fantasy nerds, who are not super into the books, who have not read the Silmarillion, who maybe have never read a fantasy novel at all. I was like, when Game of Thrones was a big thing, I was super surprised all the time by people who were talking to me about it. And I'm like, you're the kind of person who tried to beat me up in high school because I read books like this. What are you doing in my fandom? But then, of course, you quickly realize, actually, it's really cool that this is becoming normal, that this is totally mainstream. People are talking about it around the water cooler at work. And finally, as a fantasy nerd, you're not the only one, you know. But
Yeah,
they have to pull those people who are not purists, who are not fans, who are not fanatics, and just are enjoying a TV series, you know.
and I think that actually is one of the reasons why sometimes we feel uncomfortable with a mainstream adaptation, because we feel in some way it's going to dilute our fandom, that it's going to lessen our fandom, and it's in some way diluting the thing that we love. And you go, no, we still have the books, we still have our fandom. The good thing is the fandom's gotten even bigger. There are more people to talk to about it, and people who get introduced via the films or the TV shows, and you go, you should really try the book because there's some really cool stuff that they couldn't show you in the show. And it's an opportunity to grow and include more people, which I think is incredibly awesome. But I can also understand we've spent, and for those of us of a certain age, you spent a significant proportion of your life being the uncool geeker nerd who loved something that everyone made fun of. And it was your thing. It was the thing that you loved, and it was the thing that you had solace in and you could turn to. And now, well, everyone's talking about it. And, well, it's not special anymore. And you go, you know what? It still is special. It still is wonderful. It still is beautiful. We still had those experiences when we were younger. The books are still something that we can look at and go, oh, isn't this incredible? And well, they can never do it in a mainstream show. And you go, yeah, but look at the amazing things that we do get to see because it is a mainstream show. That it's, and again, it is a balance. And when we start talking about it should have done more of X or Y, it's usually we should have done more of X or Y for me. And yeah, there may be a lot of people out there like me who have the same expectations or the same desires. But there are a lot of people who aren't. And I have to be cognizant of the fact. And that's why when people say that they didn't enjoy it, you're like, I'm sorry. Like, I hope maybe you'll enjoy House of the Dragon because I know it's going in a very different direction. So try House of the Dragon. It can be awesome for you. I don't feel offended when someone doesn't enjoy it. And I'm not saying that they should have to enjoy it. But at the same time, because if someone doesn't enjoy it and they say, well, you shouldn't like it, you're like, well, why? Just because you don't? I like it. And I am willing to forgive or overlook a lot of the things that you find break your immersion because they don't break mine. And things that add to my immersion may break your immersion, but that's because we're different people and we are allowed to like and enjoy different things. It's why we have an entire genre with people going, I love the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I love the Lord of the Rings. I love the Stormlight archives. I love the Draenei saga. I love the Rift War saga. You go, and just because you love one doesn't mean that you can't love others. And just because you love one doesn't mean that you have to love others. It's a massive genre. And there is room for everyone. But people who are complaining that it is not lore accurate enough, there are huge chunks of it that are thematically accurate or are trying to interpret the lore in a way that will make sense for a mainstream audience. And yeah, it's not going to be exactly what is there, but we have to think about it as a media interpretation of Tolkien. And it's not Tolkien. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings are not Tolkien. Rings of Power is not Tolkien. Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is not Tolkien. They are adaptations of Tolkien. They show us different ways of viewing the text and different ways of interpreting the information that's in the text. And they are bringing more people into our fandom, which is awesome and amazing and brilliant. And the more that all these different shows succeed, if you don't like Rings of Power, watch House of the Dragon. If you don't like House of the Dragon, watch Wheel of Time. Whichever one that you're watching, celebrate it, enjoy it. If that's the one that you enjoy it, love it. Because the more that we are positive about the things that we love, the more it generates interest in more of this stuff, in doing other things. What other company in the world was going to spend this much money on a show? No other company was. But that has now raised the bar so high that people are going to go, huh, I wonder, should we do this? Should we invest more? Okay, what if we invest a little bit more than we were planning to, but put in a 3-year lead time so there's more time to develop the stuff? Because again, a lot of the issues are, let's move it, let's get it going very, very quickly. You have 1 year to develop, 1 year to film, go, 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 go. And it's, no, let's do what Jackson did with Lord of the Rings. Give them years of funding up front to get all of the stuff done, and then film, then do the stuff. That it's not always about the amount of money, but about the care and attention. And the more companies that get involved in this, the more production companies that see that this is good. Because right now, there are certain elements of various fandoms, and let me be incredibly clear, not all fans, not everyone involved in this, but there are certain elements within fandoms who are being so horrible that I can honestly imagine an executive producer sitting somewhere going, well, I was going to adapt a science fiction or fantasy property, but what's the point? There's too much hassle.
It's not worth it. Yep, I've been thinking about that myself lately with the way the discussions around this show and others also are. You're inviting a hell of a lot of hate doing something like this.
And there are ways that we've just had a whole discussion where you've said that you didn't like something. You're like, yeah, and I'm not going, you're wrong. But we've had this entire discussion because, yeah.
I'm also not saying the whole thing is garbage because of it. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, there are some things that I thought were not so great.
Which is absolutely fine. And
yeah.
But the thing is, we can have these conversations where you can be critical going, you know, I'm not a fan of the writing. I think the writing was a little weak here. That line in particular and that line. But, you know, if people sent tweets like that or wrote reviews like that, you'd go, yeah, there's no problem with that. No one has a problem with people being critical. But going, this is woke garbage. This is, it is the meaningless, rambling, buzzword-laden invective hurled. That is damaging. But fans have always been critical of works. What has changed in fandom is the volume at which the negative and aggressive criticism has taken hold. Fans have always complained, well, I didn't like that thing. They did that thing wrong. We have always done that. We always will do that. We will kvetch with the best of them. But what has changed? It's now become aggressive and abusive in certain small elements of fandom. Not all fans.
Hashtag not all fans.
But I hate even that I have to keep saying that, because guaranteed,
Yeah, of course.
AP complained that the fans are, and you go, I didn't. It is a small element.
Yeah.
But people take it. If I said there has always been an element ever since the consolidation of fantasy as a genre, there has always been an element of the fandom of the genre of fantasy that has been racist from its very inception. And we can look at it historically. It has always been there. There has always been an element. Does that mean that the genre of fantasy is racist? No. Does it mean that the fans of genre fantasy are racist? No. But there has always been an element from the very beginning. That is...
Which is also something I think you could probably say about any definable group of humans.
Yeah.
That there are some people there who are assholes.
And the thing is, it has now become apparently controversial to say stuff like that, to recognize that an element, some vocal minority, is being racist. How dare you call all Lord of the Rings fans racist? I didn't. But you said, well, but I have genuine criticisms. Then you're not the one being called racist, are you? The racist ones are being called racist. But it is fine not to like the show. It is fine to have criticisms of the show. But how we articulate it is actually, I think, becoming increasingly important, because the anger and outrage and rage with which a lot of this is being communicated is basically harming not only the genre, but also any future projects. So, and it doesn't mean that you then have to go, oh, well, do I have to be really positive? You go, no, you can talk about things that you don't like, but
just be sane. It's like speaking sanely about your criticisms. There's absolutely no problem with that. I don't know why anyone would have a problem with that, but like, just,
Matt,
I mean, a lot of it.
You're wrong. You're a shill. You're garbage. Like, all your views are just dumb. Yeah, because that's the entire tenor of the conversation that we've been having.
I'm almost glad, like with Rings of Power coming out, I've been thinking for a while. Just recently, a month or two ago, I bought some new editions of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, and they're gorgeous editions. And because I got the new edition of the Silmarillion, I was thinking, oh, I really want to try it again. Yeah, I DNF'd it when I was a teenager, and you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I'm sure I'd like to give it another go. And then I heard the Rings of Power was coming out, and I was like, not yet, because I think it's actually a good position to be in, that you're a Tolkien fan but not a super hardcore Tolkien expert, and you know enough to know something, but you don't know so much that you're going to be pissed off by every change. And I thought, I'm in a good position to watch Rings of Power, and I don't want to ruin that by potentially knowing too much and expecting too much about the Second Age, about who's in it and when they're in it and what exactly they're doing and all of that. I just want to sit back and say, I'm in Middle Earth again. Nice.
And the thing is, I mean, I would say there's no harm in reading. It's like the Elgabeth, the end of the Silmarillion. There's no harm in reading that to find out what's going to happen. It's like when you're rereading the Lord of the Rings and you get to the appendices. If you've read the appendices, and some of us have, because we're nerds, you know, we already know the rough outline, and that's why when you had said we don't know where the story is going, and I'm like, it's called the Rings of Power. Like, how can anyone not know where this is going? Because it is so obvious to me. And then suddenly, like when you made that point, I'm like, actually, yeah, I suppose if you didn't know it's ending up basically at the prologue of the Lord of the Rings films with Peter Jackson, if you didn't know that, how are you meant to know? And it's called the Rings of Power, and we know the whole thing about Sauron making the rings. We've been told that. We know the rhyme. But, you know, they haven't mentioned that yet. And again,
and also, I mean, like there's the high level, yes, of course. It's called Rings of Power, and we know that there are Rings of Power, and it's going towards the Rings of Power. That much is clear. But just in the first two episodes, there is there is basically one sentence that has anything to do with creating the Rings of Power. Sauron, his involvement in it, he's not even in it yet. I mean, briefly in the prologue of the first episode, but it's a slow burn, yeah, getting to the point where the rings are actually going to be made. And if you're not already steeped in the lore, you're watching a thing that is introducing a whole bunch of characters, and evil is slowly on the rise, and that's kind of about it. Like you don't really.
I would say you don't even have to be steeped in the lore. It's a slow burn. We're being introduced to characters. We're seeing their world, and you don't need the lore to understand that, to know that it is building. We know that evil has been hidden, and it's in the second episode. We get an orc. We realize, this is actually showing that evil is creeping in. So we know it's going to be a confrontation of the good guys versus the bad guys. We know by the end of the second episode, we have in the first episode, Gil-galad looks at the leaf and we see it being turned evil. Oh, big ominous thing there. In the second episode, we see an orc. You're like, right, we know that evil is coming and it's becoming more obvious. That I would argue that
you know what the scariest bit for me was? Just partially because I'm so visual, I guess, was crude oil coming out of a cow.
Yeah, that was
like just that. When you see Elrond's hand and this horrible, I was like, "Ooh, that's pretty scary, ugly." Ugh.
Can you stop talking about it? It really does make me quite queasy.
That was the worst bit for me. I was like, orcs and tunnels, and yeah, okay, that's all pretty bad. But like just that little detail, and it's like 10 seconds. I was like, that's pretty, like that's showing corruption in something really, really normal and mundane and everyday and important to life, like cows. And then that's happening to them. I was like, ooh, yeah, things are going bad.
So I think to round this all off, I am hoping that I'm looking forward to the end of the season. I am hoping that for next season that they maybe have paid attention to, let's have a closer look at continuity. Let's, when we're looking at dialogue, make sure we're using the right metaphors and similes and idioms for the characters, because elves shouldn't be talking about aged parents. Let's double check those. When we're doing the travel things, let's make sure that it is more obvious that it is realistic travel, that maybe we erred too much towards the mythic. And I have no problem. Lots of shows can improve, but I am really enjoying it. I'm loving it. I'm back in Middle Earth. I'm seeing an aspect of Middle Earth that I hadn't seen before. And I'm getting views of these characters that I haven't had before. And I'm really enjoying it. And if other people aren't, it's absolutely fine. And I hope that the show pays attention to a lot of the genuine things that have been tripping people up, like the continuity, like the occasional line of dialogue, trying to ground it slightly more. And if they know that and they do that with the next season, brilliant. But I certainly don't think this show is a train wreck in any way. And I don't think it's absolutely perfect. It's a show that I'm enjoying.
Yeah, and I mean, conclusion-wise, for me, I started out, like I explained, I started out probably watching House of the Dragon and Rings of Power a little too close together. And I was super critical of some things that we've talked about. Yesterday, I watched your chats with Philip, and I decided to give it another go because you guys had framed it again for me, had reminded me, this is Tolkien, and this is what Tolkien's like. And it's not anything like House of the Dragon. And it's actually kind of stupid of me to expect anything like that. And I watched both of the episodes again last night, and I thought, I actually really like it. I still have, like you said, some dialogue things are a little off and bit tone deaf here and there, and the continuity thing, it's just the way my particular OCD works. That stuff really annoys me. But overall, I'm actually really looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to looking back after the season's finished Because
Yeah.
I imagine once I've really got a whole package of, okay, this is the whole story we wanted to tell in season one, I'm imagining that I'll be looking back going, a lot of your views of the first two episodes were pretty immature considering,
No, and the thing is, I wouldn't say that you were stupid to have those expectations. Lots of people have those expectations because that's modern storytelling. So I don't think you were stupid to have those expectations. I think maybe expecting that the showrunners must do that is a failure on our part when we have that sort of expectation. But again, I think it's a balance. It's a balance issue between the mythic, because look at the visuals, like the golden and the richness of those warm colors with the elves, then the starker, sharper colors that are used for the dwarves, the homespun or more organic Harfoots, the scrappy, downtrodden dirt of the humans who are being sort of oppressed. They're these very clear distinctions. It's beautiful visual style, and it's symbolic. And you go, right, if the symbolism is there, then maybe I need to be thinking a little bit more in terms of looking at things symbolically rather than focused on actual representation or realistic representation as if it's like almost documentary of what happened. But I think a lot of those quibbles, a lot of those issues, yeah, they are issues with the show because they weren't paying attention to some of that stuff. I think there is room for it to improve. I don't think you were wrong to have that expectation. I think
when I said stupid, I mean that in a way as someone who is a Tolkien fan. It's kind of stupid. Yeah, it's kind of stupid to expect something to be gritty and realistic if it's Tolkien. And that is not really a fair expectation, and it's just where my mind was at. But like you guys reminded me, this is kind of how Tolkien works. This is the frame he's working in, and his show is going to be working in that frame. And then adjusting my mind and then watching it again, I was like, oh yeah, okay, it makes more sense now.
I think actually the catch-22 of all of this is Peter Jackson changed our common cultural imagination of what Tolkien was into something more action adventure focused.
I mean, he did Meet the Feebles, so.
But because that is now the sort of popular imagination of what Tolkien was, this action adventure oriented story, which bizarrely enough is actually quite far away from what Tolkien is. When someone is actually trying to be truer to Tolkien, they then get criticized for not being like Jackson. And you just go, whoops. The people who are actually trying to be truer to evoking Tolkien in a lot of respects are getting criticized. Whereas the person who radically changed the feel of Tolkien to create action-oriented, superficial similarity is praised because it fits with our modern conception. And that our memories play tricks on us. People remember The Lord of the Rings and they typically remember the film. They go back and they reread the book and go, oh, I forgot that Frodo was in his 50s. I forgot that there's 17 years in the Shire where basically nothing happens. I forgot that he went to Crick Hollow to set up a house and Fatty Bulger was there. I forgot they sat and had dinner with Farmer Maggot and his family. I forgot that
half of the book is landscape descriptions.
I forgot that the Nazgul didn't chase them to the ferry. And you suddenly realize what you had remembered, you had actually misremembered. And again, we all do it. But Matt, I thank you very much for joining me on this.
Thank you for the spontaneous invitation. It totally surprised and honored me, and it's been a blast. Anytime, happily again.
And for those of you who have stayed with us this long in a long chat, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and see you in the next one.